Hello everyone, it's me again. It's been a while since I've uploaded anything, but you can thank university for that. Hopefully you all had a good Christmas and a happy new year. The winter period is always a time full of excitement and anticipation for the holidays, and this year was especially exciting for Halo fans. In November we were given Halo Infinite's multiplayer a whole month early, which felt like an early Christmas present for a lot of people. Being someone who wasn't invited to participate in the flight of the multiplayer, no hard feelings, 343, I couldn't wait to finally experience the mechanics of the game and all of the new features it would bring to the table. Things I never thought I would see in a Halo game, both good and bad. We'll get into that later though. Of course, a lot of people were looking forward to the multiplayer of Halo Infinite, but I'm pretty sure even more people were excited to see the campaign finally drop, after being pushed back so many times. Even though we only had to wait for it for another month, I found the wait excruciating as I just wanted to play the campaign before playing the multiplayer. Halo multiplayer is great, but the actual overall story of Halo is what I find the most entertaining. Then the day came, and of course I finished the game in one sitting. Having played the game in its full form, I know that there will be DLC later down the line regarding multiplayer and the campaign, but now that both the campaign and multiplayer have launched, the game is now a whole experience. What do I think of the game? Well, it's complicated. Finally experiencing what the game has to offer left a part of me enjoying what I had played, and another part being disappointed in what was there, and also what wasn't there. The game definitely sets itself apart from other Halo games with its array of new features and style of gameplay, and I think a lot of these changes work to the game's strengths, and others definitely do not. Even excluding the changes, some of the fundamental features expected in a Halo experience vary in quality. Before I go any further, I just need to clarify that I don't think the game's bad by any means. I mean, it's definitely a step up from Guardians, there's no doubt about that, but I feel there are a few aspects that just hurt the quality overall, and I think they are some of the biggest aspects of the game that need to work to take the game to the next level. Changing a person's opinion from, yeah, I like that game, to, this is one of the greatest experiences of my life. Having played Halo Infinite, I feel enlightened and never want to play another game ever again. So it's time to get to the bottom of this, and for me to explain why I feel Halo Infinite is a mixed bag. First, I'm going to talk about the campaign and give a brief synopsis of the story, talk about the gameplay features, what I enjoyed, and ending it with what I didn't like. The teasers and marketing 343 gave us from 2018 all the way up until 2021 really built our hype and expectations for the game, and left us to ponder countless questions. When does this game take place? What ring is this on? And why is Chief sexy again? Each trailer and interview began to slowly reveal the plot of the game, and what we could expect to see in this new installment. The game begins with an opening cutscene depicting the fall of the UNSC by the hand of the Banished, a faction we were introduced to in Halo Wars 2, being led by Atriox. This cutscene also depicts the literal fall of Master Chief by Atriox, who bests him in a fight and throws him off the Infinity to his supposed death. We are then introduced to a pilot in a Pelican, who we see watching a hologram of his loved ones, and grow a beard, indicating a passage of time. It's thanks to this pilot that Chief is found, and we along with Chief are informed that he has been gone for 6 months, unaware of the UNSC's near extinction thanks to the Banished and Cortana. Despite the odds being stacked against humanity, Chief is ready for a fight, and so with the help of a new AI, aims to put a stop to the Banished's grip on the ring by gradually taking out its leaders and reuniting with the remnants of the UNSC, all the while finding out the truth of what happened to Cortana after he was gone. Now, I have a lot of issues with the campaign, which I will get into later, but I have to say I really liked this premise. This idea that humans are once again the underdogs in alien territory, with no one but the Chief and an AI to save them, felt like a great homage to the game that started it all, Combat Evolved. This game was quite clearly 343's love letter to the original game, as certain aspects of it feel as if they are an extension of Combat Evolved and its particular style. As the Halo games progressed, they focused less and less on the Halos and decided to add more to the mixture with different locations the player visited, such as ships and other planets. I'm not saying this was a bad thing, variety was needed to keep each game after Combat Evolved fresh. 343's previous games, although ambitious, did have many qualities that fans were not happy with, like a lack of Chief-focused gameplay, weird mechanics, unnecessary plot points, and an ugly art style. This game is quite clearly taking it back to basics, and what better way to do that than attempt to capture the same feeling that Combat Evolved did all those years ago. Despite being a homage to the original, the way Infinite presents itself is very different to what you would expect from a mainline Halo game. Whilst Halo games of the past incorporate semi-open world aspects to their levels, Infinite took these ideas and dove deeper into what could be possible in an open world Halo game, and I must say this is one of Infinite's strongest elements. Despite the franchise being around for 20 years now, we've never been able to fully experience experience a lot of what the rings had to offer. Well, excluding all the lore in the books, but who reads these days? Unless information is shown to me through pretty pictures and colours, I ain't interested. The area available to the player is pretty big, really giving them a sense of freedom when choosing which activity to do next. I should mention now that story missions aren't the only things the player can complete, as there are a variety of side tasks as well. Scattered across the ring are UNSC forward operating bases, or FOBs for short, that have fallen into the hands of banished squads. These bases can be taken back if all the banished enemies surrounding it are defeated, allowing Chief to call in vehicles, weapons, and it also lets Marines spawn on them. Claiming a FOB also updates your map with more side activities, such as highlighting key banished strongholds like vehicle depots, prison camps, and bases that Chief can destroy, turning the tide in the favour of the UNSC personnel remaining on the ring. In fact, there are also several Marine squads that can be helped across the ring. If saved, you can prove to yourself and Chief that he isn't an unfeeling machine, but a good person who can't let good Marines die. Or maybe you just want to kill them yourself. In the Halo universe, the Banished are some of the most brutal and unforgiving opponents ever faced by both humanity and the Covenant, shown through their sheer will not to bend to any challenge they face. Due to this, there are many high-valued Banished targets that Chief can take out to prevent them from causing further harm to any Marines unlucky enough to come across them. The problem with a lot of open-world games is they can feel sparse in some areas, as it can be difficult for developers to make sure every space on the map is filled appropriately. I can't say this is the case for Infinite though, as there are many things to do. Even just exploring the ring isn't boring, as many squads patrol around the ring, further emphasising the Banished's control over Zeta Halo. You can also destroy propaganda towers, which are controlled by a Banished grunt, who blasts his controversial political views across the ring.
Well, maybe it does work, but do you know how many times science has been proven wrong? Science has been proven wrong so many fucking times. So many times in the history of the fucking world. All the time science is getting proven. Scientists, what, are the scientists God?
Completing any of these side tasks rewards you with Valor, which unlocks you new weapons and vehicles to use at your FOBs. Along with the main campaign, you won't run out of things to do for a while. How you get to these side activities is completely in your hands too, but if you're like me, then you'll most likely just be using your grapple hook 90% of the time. This is without a doubt the best Spartan ability in any Halo game. The amount of versatility it gives you is insane, as it makes combat and movement some of the best parts of the game, perfectly integrating both of them together.
New from the UNSC, it's the multi-purpose grapple hook. With the grapple hook, you can close the gap between you and your enemies, pick up a gun when yours is out of ammo, grapple onto enemies for a quick melee kill, hijack vehicles from great distances, and bring fusion coils to your very own hands before quickly throwing it back in the enemy's face.
Seriously, that is probably the most entertaining way to kill enemies in the game. It never gets old. Movement is so much fun thanks to this little gadget. Whilst having a vehicle on hand is handy for travelling around the ring, nothing beats hoisting yourself into the air and swinging from tree to tree. Partnered with the quick slide, you move faster than the speed of light, and so it's also a speedrunner's wet dream. I'll tell you what my wet dream is, this art style. I'm so happy they decided to bin off the newer, more inferior art style for a more classic looking Halo, and it really benefits the game and complements what the game is going for. It feels like a classic Halo game, so it makes sense for the art style to be incorporated. In the last two games, it felt like all the colours in the universe had been washed away, making everything look dull, but in Infinite everything feels vibrant and alive, from the environments to each enemy as well. Speaking of the enemies, another thing I thought 343 kept getting wrong was giving the enemies in 4 and 5 personalities. They were all just blank slates and ugly as hell. With Infinite though, every banished unit you encounter has something to say, and it just makes them feel like actual living things. Brutes aren't too bright as usual, but yell at Chief and other banished units. Grunts will antagonise Chief from a distance, but then cower once you get too close. And elites are a lot more subtle, ordering enemies to attack you, cementing their status as the top dogs. It's so much more interesting when enemies do more than just growl and shoot at you. I mean, even after you are dead, they continue to hurl abuse at you, which is pretty funny. A big debate in the Halo community for a long time was what the best possible way to characterise Master Chief would be. Many people enjoyed how his character was portrayed in the original trilogy, being more machine with some hints of humanity, like when it came to Marines and Cortana, but an equal amount of people liked the new direction 343 took him, humanising him and dialing down the strong silent type trope. Halo Infinite seems to strike a healthy balance between these two phases of Chief. The game takes the time to present Chief's personality through his actions, often coming across as cold, but at the same time is shown to be sympathetic sympathetic towards others. However, it is mainly done through body language rather than dialogue, fitting with his man of action persona. That's not to say his dialogue is emotionless, because there are times throughout the game where we can hear the pain, frustration, and sadness in his voice, without it being completely over the top.
You don't understand.
Try me.
Cortana.
He's gone. Dead. All that's left are echoes, and sooner or later they'll be gone too.
Chief throughout the game is struggling to cope with the loss of Cortana, but despite this manages to push on with his mission to stop the Banished. For me, this makes him not just a badass, but one of the most sympathetic characters in fiction. Abducted as a child, undergone inhumane body modification, was forced to fight in a war he had nothing to do with, has watched many of his friends die, watched his best friend become evil, and worst of all, he is a massive virgin. The subtlety Steve Downes brings to the character is great in this game. You can really feel Chief's emotions.
I should have protected Cortana. Stopped everything from going wrong. I failed her. I will not fail you.
The characters are also a very strong aspect of this game. Well, most of them are. The pilot, or Fernando, as we later learn, was one that grew on me as the game progressed. Whilst I wasn't completely sold on the character at first, with him just constantly whining to the Chief about wanting to go home.
Found you, remember? You were out there on your own, and you'd still be out there if it wasn't for me. I thought I was going home.
Listen, I understand that you have family back home, but can you shut up for 2 seconds? I think I hear an audio log over here.
Once he was totally honest with Chief, his character got a lot better, plus he gets you out of some tough spots during the game, so bonus points for that. Another character I was totally unsure of before the launch of the game was the weapon, mainly due to the fact that I wasn't sold on a new AI replacing Cortana, who looked exactly like her, as it felt like a cop-out. However, for most of the game, I found myself really liking her. She didn't feel like a copy of Cortana, despite literally being that. Whereas Cortana in the past was a lot more confident in her abilities, Weapon came across as someone wanting to prove their worth, and wasn't totally sure of herself.
Is it safe?
Come on, it's me. An infiltration program designed. Oops.
I really loved her dynamic with Chief as she tried to pry his cold exterior apart, attempting to find the emotion he hides away from others. I also liked how Chief didn't 100% trust her, which made total sense given the fact that Cortana went on a galaxy-wide murdering spree, so he might not be open to the idea of a clone. Slowly but surely he began to warm up to her, and I liked how their relationship felt like a natural progression from acquaintances to friends. Enough about the heroes, let's talk about the main villain of the game, Escharum, the heart and soul of the Banished. He was once part of the Covenant before leaving after his finest student, Atriox, rebelled against the galactic superpower. Throughout the game, Escharum antagonizes Chief about the UNSC's swift defeat by the Banished, mocking him and the rest of humanity for their weaknesses.
Do you know how long it took us to neutralize your greatest ship? 4 minutes! In 4 minutes, the Infinity, mankind's finest achievement, became a memory.
Escharum for me is one of the most intriguing antagonists we have seen in a Halo game by far, especially in the 343 era. Just something about the way he talks to Chief and the way he articulates his words just makes me so invested in him, even though he is a brute, which are usually portrayed as mindless beasts. Escharum is presented as a clever tactician, gradually working away at Chief, uncovering any weaknesses he can use to destroy him. He is also not presented as being completely egotistical and all-knowing, like the Prophets or the Didact. He was a simple soldier who was tired of fighting for a cause he did not believe in, and someone who witnessed their entire homeworld be destroyed by an AI manufactured by humanity. Chief even acknowledges the similarities between him and Escharum, acknowledging that he is a soldier created by circumstances out of his own hands, same as the Chief.
Why is he telling you all this?
Death changes people. It forces you to look at yourself and make a choice.
And what did he choose?
Same as I would. Fight.
In fact, once you defeat Escharum, he wants Chief to tell the galaxy that he died well, showing us that he wanted nothing more than to honour his beliefs and his banished brothers. With each new Halo game, many weapons are added to spice up gameplay. Each faction is given its own weapons that reflect both the style, technology, and fighting tactics of the faction they belong to. The UNSC has a few new guns like the Bulldog, Sidekick, and Commando. This game very much encourages you to get right in the enemy's face, thanks to the grapple hook, and these guns are deadly at close range. They go together so well, like crackers and cheese. Oh wait, I didn't mean to say cracker. With every Halo game, I tend to stick with the UNSC based weapons, as they are usually the best, like the DMR, battle rifle, shotgun, etc. But with Infinite, I found myself really wanting to use the Banished weapons quite a lot. The Covenant aren't in this game, but luckily most of their weapons are used by the Banished, so it's all good. The Banished was originally founded by brutes, so as expected their weapons reflect their bloodthirsty and cruel nature. Each one of the weapons wielded by the brutes is heavy hitting and accompanied by a crude spike sticking out of the end, allowing the user to kill an enemy in the most brutal way possible. They also come with their own cute names like Mangler, Skewer, and Ravager, just in case you forgot who designed these weapons. I thought these were fantastic additions to the game, as they are excellent at killing tougher enemies, and headshots with the Mangler just feel so satisfying. There were plenty of new weapons, but these three right here were the cream of the crop. So yeah, that's what I enjoyed about the campaign. Oh yeah, and we can't forget about the music. Now here's the part where I discuss things I didn't really like as much, and things I outright hated. Let me start with the story. Despite liking the premise of the story, I really wasn't interested in the narrative 343 had created for this installment. Yes, I liked aspects of it like Escharum for example, but the whole main story felt a bit empty. My disappointment immediately started when the opening cutscene began to play, depicting Chief falling and eventually being found by Fernando, as I realised I wasn't going to experience the initial attack by the Banished and the fall of the UNSC. To me this felt like a necessary chapter to have at the start of the game. Without it, the progression from Halo 5 to Infinite feels very disjointed. A portion of this game should have been dedicated to Cortana and her forces fighting the UNSC and the Banished. Due to the fact that these key events were brushed over, it felt as though the might of the Banished was not shown to us, but rather just told to us, which isn't as good. Not actually being able to witness what the Banished did to the UNSC lessens their impact, I feel. It doesn't show us their true strength and power in the universe. And while you could argue that we got to see this in Halo Wars 2, the problem with that is Halo Wars 2 was a spin-off game, and not a lot of people play spin-off games, so the average normie fan won't know who the Banished are, which is a problem if you're trying to make them look intimidating. It's like how Halo 5 required you to read novels and comics to understand what was actually happening, leaving the story a complete mess. While it obviously isn't as bad here, I still think it was a missed opportunity to not even have at least a couple of missions where we get to fight the Banished on board the Infinity before it gets wiped out by Atriox, which leads on to my next point.
Atriox!
Atriox was completely wasted in the main story of this game, for honestly no reason it seems. He got sidelined to make room for Escharum to be the big bad of the story, but why? Why not just have Atriox be in control of the Banished and have Escharum be his second in command? I just don't see the point in taking out the one responsible for the Banished's existence out of the equation for most of the game, besides from a few flashbacks and a brief appearance at the end. It's pretty obvious they're going to use him for some DLC down the line, but the story feels lackluster, so we shouldn't have to wait months after the game's already come out to have an actual fulfilling experience. When you take a lot of the side missions out of the equation, the game feels so short. I knew the story wasn't great when the story depicted in the audio logs sounded so much more exciting than the main playable story. I'll give it to 343, I think that's a first for Halo. Again, another reason why it would have been great for Chief to be on the ring before it all went to shit, which could have led him being called back to the Infinity, then finally confronting Atriox when we see him get defeated. In this video, I've been praising the Banished a lot, which is for good reason. They are one of the better factions other than the Covenant and the Flood. Ah, the Flood. Wish they were here, but maybe there's still hope. Halo Infinite's character roster, although small, was great for the most part. This is the part of the video where I talk about the Harbinger, the most unnecessary character in the entire game. The Harbinger is introduced as a secondary antagonist in the game, and is the leader of the secondary faction, the Endless. The Harbinger might be the most lazy antagonist we have seen so far in a Halo game, from a creative standpoint. How many times are we going to see this same trope over and over again in the 343 era, of a character who believes they know better than the Forerunners, and have vague reasons for being evil? Throughout the game, the Endless are portrayed as the most dangerous force in the galaxy, even more dangerous than the Flood apparently.
In particular.
Containment? The Flood? Why would I... You and I both know that there are worse things than the Flood within this ring.
Whoa, okay. These enemies sound pretty scary if they are stronger than a world-ending infection. I bet the enemies the Endless utilize must be tough to fight. From what we see in the campaign, this couldn't be further from the truth. Let me introduce to you Skimmers, flying drone things that feel even less dangerous than grunts. If 343 wanted to make the Harbinger feel a bit more intimidating, it would have been a lot better if they gave her more ferocious and tougher creatures to control, rather than these Promethean-looking lackeys. The Harbinger appears occasionally during the game, before being killed off by Chief at the game's climax. Bringing in a new character just to kill her off, without giving her any substance or anything notable to do. It's not like her and the Skimmers add an interesting dynamic either, as they just work with the Banished, making her inclusion feel even more unnecessary. If she was just going to work with the Banished, essentially being another leader to the faction, why not just put an already established villain in her place, and then have her appear in the end credits instead, allowing her to bring her faction back in some DLC, with her still being alive, or you know, just underuse her, and then kill her. That seems more logical. Speaking of unnecessary inclusions, let's move on to seed collecting. Out of all the new features 343 added to the gameplay, why was this one of them? I've never seen a more unnecessary game mechanic in a game, ever. What happened to the good old days when you could just push a button and open a door? Why do we now have to pause what we are doing and find some little metal butt plugs to open a door? A lot of the time they just slow the pace down, and others are just so pointless it seems like the devs couldn't even be bothered making it remotely challenging to find them. Some of them have literally been placed feet away from the place where you are supposed to put them. Why? Just why? There's no denying how beautiful Zeta Halo is. Its grand scale, luscious trees, and Forerunner architecture make it one of the most immersive locations I've seen in a Halo game. But there's no variety. Everywhere you go on the ring feels the same, which kind of nullifies the large scale 343 is going for. Although some may argue that being set on a ring means 343 have to keep the environments consistent, which I suppose is valid, except the fact that Combat Evolved managed to add variety to a Halo ring 20 years before Infinite failed to do so. Despite Combat Evolved taking place on a ring, the environments differentiate themselves with other levels in the game, with different styles in terms of both design and gameplay, which ensures that the Halo ring feels like a real ecosystem, whereas Combat Evolved felt like a true journey. I always felt like I was retreading my steps when playing Infinite. Despite being on a huge alien-built machine, 343 doesn't push the boat out far enough to make it feel like an alien world, which is even more disappointing when you look back at the original tease of Halo Infinite, and look at all the different environments and wildlife that were supposed to be in the game. Guess we'll have to wait for DLC to find out. Yay. Okay, now that I've gotten the campaign out of the way, it's time I moved my attention to multiplayer, the thing that is going to keep players playing Infinite for years to come. Bungie era multiplayer was known for its competitive and fast-paced style, constantly keeping players on their toes, with power weapons, vehicles, and abilities, making each match you played a chaotic battlefield, while still keeping a competitive edge. Although players could definitely be outmatched by some opponents, these power weapons and gadgets leveled the playing field, making most fights unpredictable. Although 343 carried on this style of multiplayer, it started to noticeably lose the spark that made multiplayer in Halo so addictive. It felt a lot slower, and boring map designs partnered with bland Spartan abilities and ugly armor styles left a lot to be desired. It seems like 343 targeted a lot of these core issues with their multiplayer and wanted Infinite to be something truly special, and to an extent they succeeded, whereas in the past 343's newer implementations hurt the overall quality of the multiplayer. Infinite's newest mechanics reinvigorate what Halo multiplayer is all about. Like the campaign, it strikes a healthy balance between old and new Halo with its style and gameplay. Maps feel like actual places that fit into the universe and don't look like they were just hastily made by an underpaid intern. Spartan abilities actually make the gameplay even more fast-paced and exciting, keeping the game engaging and forcing the player to always stay alert. A feature I wasn't 100% sold on was the fact that the colour of your armour would not change when either on blue team or red team. Instead, there is a glow around your teammates and enemies, distinguishing them from each other, red for enemies and blue for teammates. I didn't like this idea on paper, as I thought it would be confusing to distinguish teammates from enemies. If all they had was a tiny glowing effect around them, I could picture myself unloading a magazine on one of my teammates by mistake. But after having a look for myself, I really like this latest way of distinguishing teams, mainly due to the fact that it allows you to fully appreciate everyone's armor designs. And I'll tell you now, these designs are just works of art. This was another benefit of the art style, taking on a more classic approach, as it meant we got to see the armours of old to their fullest potential. Armour designs are now smooth and sleek, and don't make your Spartan look like a wardrobe. Even armour sets from 4 and 5 that looked pretty horrendous have been redeemed thanks to this design choice. Halo Infinite multiplayer also introduced for the first time an AI companion that talks to you during a match and reacts to your actions on the battlefield. Having someone commentate over the gameplay sounds as annoying as someone backseat gaming, but honestly I find them really entertaining. Cirque gang, rise up. Halo Infinite, despite being aimed in my opinion to fans of the classic Halo games, is very welcoming to new players and provides them with many options to help ease themselves into the game, providing them with things like a tutorial to help them work on getting god tier aim. One of the main issues with multiplayer is that as of right now, it is pretty bare bones in terms of content. Content that I think should have really launched with the game, like maps for example. Maps are the lifeblood of every Halo game's multiplayer and tend to provide the most variety to the gameplay. A large variety of maps keeps the experience fresh and means players are less likely to get bored of playing a map if the rotation of maps is healthy. Halo Infinite has very few maps. There are 10 maps in total in Halo Infinite. Doesn't sound so bad on paper, but once you realise that these maps are exclusive to certain modes, then the problem becomes a lot more obvious. 7 of them are exclusive to arena game modes, whilst the other 3 belong to large big team game modes. As a fan of the larger scale game modes of Halo, I am very disappointed with the lack of maps available to play. Due to the lack of maps, big team battle gets fairly boring after a couple of games, as it becomes disinteresting fighting in the same environments. This leads on to my next point, which is a lack of design creativity. Although the maps on this game look gorgeous, a lot of them feel the same and struggle to distinguish themselves from each other. Big team battle feels even more repetitive, as all 3 maps have the same aesthetic of being set on a mountain range that has large pieces of unnatural terrain built within them, like Banished, UNSC and Forerunner structures. It just makes them feel so predictable, and whilst yes, Deadlock takes place during the night, differentiating itself a little bit, it still feels too similar to the other 2 maps. Whereas in the past, Bungie would often try to give every map its own unique personality, 343 has played it too safe for the most part, giving us too many similar environments. This just makes the world of Halo feel that much more smaller, when in actual fact it's one of the most expansive and varied in fiction. Along with the departure from map variety, there are a lot of key game modes that are missing from the game as well. Game modes that are all staples of Halo, that are all as nearly as recognisable as Master Chief himself. With the backlash 343 got for not including Infection, Griffball and Firefight with the launch of Halo 5, you would think they would have learned their lesson, but no, they repeated the same mistake. Stuff like this is so irritating, as they know how much these game modes mean to the fan base. Leaving stuff out of a game that was present in older games in the franchise feels like they're taking steps backwards rather than forwards. Let's not forget the absence of Forge, which in turn meant that custom games, one of the greatest things to come out of Halo multiplayer, did not launch with the game. Everyone knows how great of a feature custom games is, and to leave it out at launch is just heresy. 343 plans to support the game for years to come. I think most of us can agree though, that half finishing a huge aspect of your game, then launching it, then finishing it probably in a year or 2 is not great, is it? Star Wars Battlefront 2 anyone? I love when developers carry on adding new content to a game, but when the same content they are adding should have launched with the base game, and in the past had launched with a base game, it makes you wonder how long it will take for Halo Infinite to reach its fullest potential. I knew Halo Infinite multiplayer was going to have its fair share of issues when it was revealed as free to play. Battle passes are just the way of life in gaming now. 343 definitely handled it a lot better than other games have in the past. What is very concerning, however, is the item shop. It's genuinely disgusting how 343 has handled these microtransactions. The most infamous so far was definitely the HAZOP armor kit that could be purchased for 2,000 credits, which was available in the shop for £16 or $21.67. All that money for an armor variant. An armor variant, lest we forget, that was free to earn in Halo Reach. What's even more strange to think about is that the battle pass costs around half of that, and yet they're making people shell out all that money for one armor piece. There are so many bundles in this game that are overpriced, which honestly makes me scared for what is to come. It just makes me think, what other armor variants are they going to do this to? If they dare try and do the same thing to my precious EOD armor, I will personally fly to 343's HQ and straighten things out myself. I also don't understand how stuff like this makes it into the game before any of these. Just absolute disrespect.